Reverend Jim Fletcher here, rector of St George's here in the heart of Gravesend.
Christoph, local historian here at St George's Church in the parish of Gravesend in the Kingdom of Kent.
I'm Neil, I'm the church warden. I've been here a church warden for quite a few years.
In fact, he knew Pocahontas.
Yes.
I've not been here before to Gravesend, and I'm suddenly aware that this place goes back a long way, but it does have the most downbeat name that there's ever been in any place. Why is it called Gravesend? Do we know why it's called Gravesend?
Not why you think.
There are lots of theories about the name, but one thing I can be absolutely clear to you is it's got nothing to do with death, nothing to do with plagues, nothing to do with bodies, nothing whatsoever to do with graves. In the days when Kent was a separate country, and some of us still wish it was, the King of Kent had a gentleman called a Revd, or a Greve, or sometimes a Graf, depending on which way you want to look at it. He would be an important individual, a big landowner, possibly related to the King of Kent, of which there were many kings of Kent. There wasn't just one, we had loads. We were independent for a long time. And he appointed this gentleman to be in charge of the river, taxation, law and order, and raising an army, normally against the English, when necessary. And Gravesend's location is one of very few places along the Thames that actually where the town or the parish meets the river directly. Normally you have marshes in between the place where people live and the actual edge of the river. Gravesend, Greenhive, Erith are three places that don't have that. They are directly on the river. So he was the Graf in charge of all these things. Presumably he had a palace or a manor house here, we don't really know. And this was his headquarters or his end. So this was the end, he was the Graf, Graf's End, Gravesend. All you need to remember is it's got nothing to do with what people will say. Understandably,
Which
people will
think,
say.
isn't it? Yeah.
They think, oh, of course
graves,
it's to do with,
Yeah.
it's the last place where you could dump bodies off of ships before going into the sea. Well, there isn't such a law.
Sounds plausible.
Yeah.
It does sound plausible. Or it's where the plague ended. Well, it didn't, because you had plague in Sandwich and Dover, so it certainly didn't end here. So really, it's got nothing to do with bodies. Well, the Kingdom of Kent was founded around 455 by Hengist and Horsa, two brothers, Hengist and Horsa, the Laurel and Hardy of the Anglo-Saxon world. And they founded the Kingdom of Kent, and so we're talking about it. It's in that period that we're talking about the name, but the name has changed in spelling and pronunciation over the years. But the original meaning.
There was government, and you know that.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
The Kingdom of Kent was considered to be one of the most civilised and best governed of the seven kingdoms of the Saxon era in what is now England, but didn't exist in those days. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Bexley, Bromley, all that. It's not London. It's Kent. Kent went all the way up to and included Deptford.
Well, I also saw there's a market up in town that had a 1500s type date on it.
1268.
But
that's
I knew it was early.
Well, that's
Two look like a five. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just that's a document to say that the charter of the market was agreed at that time by the King of England, who was telling us what to do. But the interesting thing is that we had a market long before that, but we don't have any documentary evidence. The original church in which Pocahontas was buried was destroyed by fire in August 1727. It's the Great Fire of Gravesend.
Sense for that comment, yeah.
And so consequently it had to be rebuilt. Well, how were they going to do that? Well, there was some money from the royal family. There was also some money from a fund to try and expand parish churches at a time when the population was increasing generally in the area. But the other reason was that there was an extra tax put on coal coming past Gravesend, the money of which was to help rebuild the church. So it was destroyed in 1727 and reopened completely for worship again in 1733.
Yes, followers of the channel will probably have recognised that this is a 50 Churches Act church. It's this one. and it's in the second round of Churches Act churches, the ones which are financed by the coal tax money but were not new parishes. You could call them non-core 50 Churches Act churches.
This blackened stone here
Yes.
is the grave of Charles Sloane, and he was the architect of this church. He was also the architect of the old town hall in Gravesend, which stood on the same site as the present old town hall in the High Street. That was mainly 1830s and then Victorian, so it completely replaced the one that he produced in 1764.
From the first church,
Oh, so you have
there's that, yes.
Oh, so at least some of it was stone. There's columns in there.
Well, precisely. Benefaction boards, I think is their technical
Common back
term.
then, weren't they?
And they were all people, Henry Pinnock, for instance, 1624. We've just celebrated the 400th anniversary of the St Thomas's Almshouses in Gravesend. I wrote its history for them.
I'm just reading here about the church wardens that were made payable to the church wardens of,
Well, also
distribute the money as well.
These were both recently restored.
Yes.
We did a lot of fundraising. They're very, very expensive to get them restored because originally you could barely read it.
You could barely read them, that's right.
How old are these windows? Do they date back to
They're mainly 19th century. And you've got the patron saint of Gravesend over there, St George, which is fine. But Kent we have our own patron saint, Saint Augustine, who brought Christianity to the Kingdom of Kent. Not like the textbooks say, he brought it to England. No, he didn't. He brought it to the Kingdom of Kent specifically, and from there, he and other early Christians spread the word throughout the Saxon kingdoms.
Is there a theme to the windows as a whole, or are they all...
Well, the theme is, with most windows of its kind, it's remembering important and wealthy local families, like the Netlinghams.
It's when the disciples fell asleep in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Okay, so this is just before he's arrested.
Yes, that's right.
Recognise the Good Samaritan?
Yes.
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 Absolutely. Yes.
The one I'm usually quite good at.
The angel at the tomb saying everything's all right. These look as if they're all done in the same style at the same time. I'm guessing either the decision was made to do them, and then people kind of dedicated
I think it was a
money.
fashion.
Yes.
And I think the technology enabled this sort of thing to happen more easily in the mid to late 19th century.
Yes. I would guess that this is not the same period as some of the others, actually.
Yes, that one does look different.
It does look a bit different, doesn't it?
Well, it might be, but it's got 1887 on it, so it is in fact
it
the
looks
same
near,
period.
yeah. But that's the Ascension, I guess.
Yes. I was just going to say, this side of the church, again, dates that when
1897.
that was added on,
Yeah.
so that side of the church.
We need to go outside in a moment because you'll find a fantastic door which almost leads to nowhere. And you think to yourself, that's a lot of expense. Well, that's because it wasn't there originally. This is 1897. This was created in the times of the Revd Haslam. And originally, the wall, just like the one that you see here, went down where these pillars are. This is Aberdeen granite. And the original entrance, well, there was always an entrance like we have now, but the main entrance was there. So beyond these pillars, you've got to imagine, none of that is here. You're looking onto Gravesend West Street, which was the main part of the town, usually filled with slums and the worst possible area in many ways, but the main entrance to the church would have been here, and the pulpit, instead of being there, was directly opposite you, and you would have had galleries like this one along this wall,
All the way along.
and along here as well.
That makes sense.
The sanctuary is 1892. That's how it was done in the way that it is now.
Well, it fully uses its plot, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's a funny detail, isn't it?
Yeah, none of the windows are the same on the other side.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Well spotted.
Certainly not the same as this.
You've got this very fine doorway here, which leads almost to nowhere. The door was originally where you have those granite pillars inside. Just continued along there, and that was in the middle of it. So that would have been the entrance that goes into the town. You would then go through that door, and that's where you'd have your box pews, and directly opposite you would be the pulpit. It's really odd to have a door like that in an obscure place. Well, that's why it never was.
You open that now, you'd be faced with cupboards and a
Oh,
kitchen,
really?
and a kitchen sink the other side, and the toilet's just there.
I don't think
it's-
I noticed it.
No, there was
from
another door on the
inside.
inside. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, while we're at this end, if you look
Yeah.
back at the glorious, or if any viewers have a spare $500,000,
Yes.
we can restore that.
It's a George English organ, which organ experts will tell you is a pretty good thing to have. It's a Premier League organ, paid for by the landlord of a former public house in Gravesend, the Catherine Wheel, which was in the High Street in, I think it was 1764.
Another local celebrity we have.
Yes,
General Gordon.
General Gordon, who was Lieutenant Colonel Gordon when he was in Gravesend. His job was to rebuild the fortifications along the Thames to fob off potential invasion from Napoleon III's France. He did say to the government at the time, you do realise these are complete white elephants that will never be used. The government, of course, didn't believe him. Quite honestly, I wouldn't have believed him, but he turned out to be right. He is remembered in Gravesend not because of his military prowess, though that is pretty formidable. He was a true Christian. He had no fear of death, he had no worry about injury, and his money that he gave almost all of his wages to helping the poor in Gravesend while he was here, because he said, well, the army provide me with 3 meals a day, they provide me with clothing, and they provide me with accommodation.
But what was he really famous for, though? Because it was something to do with it. I must admit, I've heard of him, but
Well,
I don't
you probably know
what. Yeah.
there is the film starring Charlton Heston. And Heston played Gordon quite successfully, actually. He was known as Chinese Gordon because he was involved in the Taiping rebellions in China during the 1840s and 50s, when Britain was desperately trying to make them all junkies so that they could make money out of them, something that is swept under the carpet in English history. Don't cut that bit out, it's important. In Sudan, of course, is where he was eventually killed.
Yeah,
Much, we think, to the relief of the British government, who he was a nuisance. He was somebody who would criticise them for basically building an empire without the wish to improve the lives of people who lived there. All they were interested in was making money, and of course Gordon had no time for money whatsoever. I don't need it, so nobody else does, was his view.
And if you're going down to the estuary, those that just walk along the promenade, there's a statue.
He's out of political favour at the moment, but then Gordon wasn't interested in politics. That's the irony of it all. When I do take people up here, I tell them under no circumstances are they to have any accidents.
No, exactly.
Otherwise they'll be thrown out the top window.
Yes.
This might be one of the most recent
Peels. There's a 2017 one behind you. That was the 400th anniversary peel.
Because that on the top of it has got the White Horse of Kent on the red background. That's our flag of the Kingdom of Kent. Not the bell, it's just a red flag with a white horse like that on it. Yeah. The Great Mutiny of the Nore, N-O-R-E, it's an area of the River Thames where it meets the North Sea to the north of the Isle of Sheppey, roughly. And it's where ships would anchor. And in 1797, which viewers will remember, of course, from their days at school, was the French Revolutionary Wars. The British were very worried that the ships would go over to France and change sides. That didn't happen, and in the end, the Mutiny of the Nore was put down brutally, of course, as you'd expect. But one of the leaders, a man called William Wallace, nothing to do with the William Wallace of Scotland, survived, poor devil, and he was brought to Gravesend, of all places. Why he wasn't taken to Sheerness, I don't know, but he was brought to Gravesend and put in prison, where he died by accident, Gov, inside the cell. And his body was brought up to this very room where he was laid out on the floor. And then, of course, after he started to smell a bit, they thought they ought to get rid of him. So they dragged his dead body, his cadaver, down those stone steps that you just came up, no doubt with his head going bonk, bonk, bonk on each step as he went down. They took him to the entrance to the churchyard nearest West Street, stuck him on a cart, an open cart, which was pushed around the town for people to jeer at, urinate on, spit at, And the worst of it all was the cart was pushed around by the pupils of the Gravesend Free School. Could you imagine your grandchildren, you allowing them to indulge in such a savage thing?
I can imagine it.
Well, he was taken all around the town and eventually buried at some crossroads in Gravesend, but on the road towards Northfleet, where he was buried, and there were metal stakes put through his thighs so that his body could never rise again from the grave. But I do know he did later work for the planning department.